Mike, today is a great day. Today, we get to stop handling Steven Soderbergh movies with kid gloves. We don't have to be patient with his development as a filmmaker or question his unorthodox project choices or say something is really better than we expected it to be based on its reputation. Because today, we get to talk about Steven Andrew Soderbergh's first great film. I'm excited. Are you excited?
Keir, there are few perfect movies in this world, and I'm here to tell you and everyone that Out of Sight is one of them. If this is the only movie Soderbergh ever made, if this was his Night of the Hunter, I'd be campaigning for him to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for this movie alone.
You are excited.
Look, Out of Sight is my favorite Soderbergh movie. Like, I love it. I love it. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies ever. Top 5. Send me to the desert island and let me take this movie with me. It's the real reason for this podcast.
Oh, now the truth comes out.
Yeah, we're doing 36 episodes, or maybe more, depending on how this guy goes, just for this hour. I mean, like, not really, but the hyperbole isn't that much of hyperbole.
Well, welcome to the Filmographer's Podcast, where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. I'm Keir Graff.
And I'm Michael Moreci. In our inaugural season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, discussing why each of his films succeeded or failed, looking at them in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time it was released. As always, we want to know how working artists make a living doing what they love, because we are working artists who make a living doing what we love.
And we want to keep it that way. Let's begin. Out of Sight, which came out in 1998, is Soderbergh's seventh theatrical feature, arriving 9 years after Sex, Lies, and Videotape debuted in 1989. For all the ups and downs he's experienced so far, he has been very productive, and let's remember that he's still only 35 years old. A grizzled Hollywood veteran with 7 movies under his belt at age 35. Soderbergh was pretty far along in developing Charlie Kaufman's script, Human Nature, and this was before Kaufman was a produced screenwriter. He was still trying to get Being John Malkovich off the ground. It's easy to see what's attracted Soderbergh to the material, as it's about the ultimate outsiders, people who were living both au naturel and in nature, who make uneasy returns to civilization. Meanwhile, Jersey Films, which had made the successful Get Shorty in 1995, was looking for a director after Barry Sonnenfeld pulled out because apparently nobody could explain to him what kind of film it was going to be. Which I find this mystifying because, like Get Shorty, which Sonnenfeld directed, Out of Sight was based on a Scott Frank adaptation of a later Elmore Leonard novel. Couldn't Sonnenfeld just have replicated the tone of Get Shorty?
Yeah, I don't really understand that. I feel like there's got to be some sort of other underlying issue that Sonnenfeld had, because, like, he had it. He nailed it. He did it. I don't know why he was so apprehensive to do it again under basically the same conditions, but luckily he didn't, because it opened up a really great door to somebody else, namely the person this podcast is about. Sonnenfeld got the Leonard Town. He went to Leonard Town.
Robert Town's less successful brother.
Yeah. Or it's the place you go, which filmmakers often go to make Leonard adaptation. You go to Leonard Town.
Leonard Town. It's just outside of Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. Be careful, guys. There's a trifecta of Leonard movies from the 90s. So you have your Out of Sight, you have your Get Shorty, and you have your Jackie Brown. And the one thing that connects all of them, that makes them really successful, is the tone. They all feel really tonally connected. They're different films, but they all feel, and I'm going to say this with a little bit of a shiver running down my spine, they're part of the same shared universe.
The Elmore Leonard cinematic universe. I mean, I would sign up for that cinematic universe a lot more rapidly than some cinematic universes.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's true. Like, I love how, I mean, you know, Get Shorty to me is kind of the slickest of them. Mm-hmm. And still a really great movie, but probably my least favorite of the three. And that's not like dissing it in any way. Jackie Brown is just like, I mean, an amazing Tarantino film in a way that it doesn't feel like every other Tarantino film. Anyway, Casey Silver, chairman of Universal, called Soderbergh and suggested that he try to get the job. Soderbergh loved the script, was familiar with Leonard's work, and knew he could pull it off, but passed because he was working on Human Nature. Mike, do you know which actor was already attached to Out of Sight?
I do. George Clooney, of course. People magazine had named him the sexiest man alive the previous year, and they were right. But then he followed that very prestigious award with making Batman and Robin. And so this was a time when film and TV actors, so they weren't as fluid working between mediums, and Clooney was having trouble getting over the hump and reaching that vaunted status of being a leading man on the big screen. And Batman and Robin really did, it hurt him pretty badly. He had done a few movies prior, but then Batman and Robin came, and it was following 3 successful Batman movies, and this was the 4th that was, critically maligned, didn't do well at the box office. So he needed a hit if he was going to complete his transition and get from, TV, from obviously the ER heartthrob doctor to being a movie star.
Absolutely. And do you know who Soderbergh wanted to play the key role of Puff in Human Nature? This is the man who was raised by apes in the forest.
No, I actually don't know that.
Chris Kattan.
Oh, yeah, that makes
also
sense.
known as Mr. Peepers on Saturday Night Live. Soderbergh was choosing Chris Kattan over George Clooney. Then Silver told him, "Don't be an idiot. This project is being handed to you on a plate, and opportunities like this are once in a lifetime." That's not an exact quote, but more or less. After some deliberation, Soderbergh realized he was right and pulled out of Human Nature, which was eventually directed by Michel Gondry, starring Tim Robbins and Patricia Arquette, and was a huge flop. Soderbergh pitched his version of Out of Sight to Clooney and Jersey Films as having the energy of a 1970s Friedkin film and the character, humor, and drama of a Hal Ashby film. He told The Village Voice later, "I guess it was self-evident to everybody that if I did it, there was no way I wasn't going to pee on it. It was going to have my stench no matter what. Fortunately, that's what they wanted. Jersey Films made it clear that they had no desire to make Get Shorty 2. Which, again, is kind of weird because Get Shorty was great and everybody liked it and it was successful, but okay.
Yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, there's so much mystery around this, like why everyone's like distancing themselves from a really successful movie.
I almost feel like there's some sort of story that we're not being told, and this is the official record that they all kind of agreed upon, and there's some, I don't know, somebody had a coke problem. I don't know, but it none of this quite makes sense.
No, and it's not one of those movies, and this is a quick aside, that has a bad legacy. There's not like, the problematic Get Shorty shooting, like it's, I don't know, shooting being like, obviously shooting the film.
Right.
I just don't know, like I said earlier, like there's got to be something else that made Sonnenfeld walk away and will make, people want to be like, we just don't want to be a continuation of that. It's puzzling.
Yeah. And nobody was in blackface. I mean, it's like, it's totally fine to watch it today and enjoy it.
Exactly. Yes. It's a very harmless movie.
Ironically, Jersey did make a Get Shorty sequel in 2005 called Be Cool. But again, we have no idea why they were crapping on Get Shorty at the time because people loved it and it made money. But anyway, enough about Get Shorty. Mike, let's talk about Out of Sight. It is time for your 1-sentence summary.
I mean, I like to go with best movie ever, but
disallowed.
All right. Well, if that's the case, I do have this. Sparks fly when a career bank robber crosses paths with a determined U.S. Marshal, and their undeniable attraction to one another pulls others into their orbit, including a 2-bit boxer, a thief always in the process of spiritual reform, and a stoner with a plan to steal $5 million from a crooked Wall Street investor.
Sounds like a pretty good summary of the best movie ever.
Hey, there we go.
Mike, I know this is a movie you know and love and have seen many, many times. Did you see or think or feel anything new with this viewing, especially now that we're watching Soderbergh's films in order?
Yeah, I mean, the context was pretty interesting for me because what really struck me is how I was just amazed how Soderbergh made this leap, from where he was, like this trajectory, this King of the Hill, Kafka, underneath, Schizopolis, etc. And by the way, listen to our past episodes. We cover all of them. But we've spoken about this in the past, after Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which is still, of those early movies, the crown jewel of those movies, for sure. Most of his films had artistry, charm, or intelligence, sometimes all three. Even the Underneath, which I think we're pretty set that's our least favorite, it had some flourishes, particularly with the nonlinear storytelling and Soderbergh's use of color, and both those things exist in Out of Sight. But Out of Sight is just so much better. It's just a superior movie, and I really think him breaking down in the Underneath, the way, personally breaking down the way we discussed, and then getting really goofy and freewheeling in Schizopolis and getting back to those indie roots, like that stuff had to happen. And we've talked about that, but he can't bring the levity and fun and tonal mastery that he does to this picture. And that's what really makes Out of Sight so special without those experiences. I see the path, is my point. I see how he started in this one place, this Sex, Lies place, and went through this progression that was sometimes painful. And the things that he learned and that made him turn this corner, this really important corner. And that's what got us Out of Sight.
In our culture, it feels like we love the myth of the fully formed, artist, like on their debut. We love, debut albums and movies and books and things that are just, like, oh, wow, where did this person come from? And I think it's partly because we rarely afford artists a chance to kind of grow up in public. And it's like Soderbergh, he didn't go to film school. He kind of went to film school in public.
Yeah.
He got the opportunity to make movies as a young man, and his, we've talked about it a lot before. We'll talk about it again. The success of his first effort, which is a very, very good movie, afforded him these opportunities to keep failing and failing. But if he didn't have the kind of intelligence and self-deprecation and ability to be very analytical about his own work that he does have, he just never would have arrived at this spot. And it is so fascinating to get to this point in his career. And this is why this is such a fun episode to record, is we've just seen so much growth, and we've seen some really, amazing moves by this guy. We've also seen some big missteps. We've also learned more about his emotional growth and lack of growth. And just to see it all come together where, he's kind of purged his demons with his last couple of projects, and he's learning to work loose. And now here he comes in and makes a very Hollywood type movie with the kind of confidence. He just kind of throws like his formalism out the window, and he's suddenly just able to work loose, but with a bigger budget than he's worked before. And it's just terrific. It's just fun. I don't know anybody who doesn't like this movie. Everybody loves this movie.
Everybody loves this movie, and it's such a great point you make, because I wish it was a lesson that, Hollywood would learn. It's the stuff that we've talked about. Like, every movie has to be a big, huge success, has to be a tentpole, every movie's got to be huge. And that's the way like cinema, box office cinema works now. There's no room for middle ground, middle budget, those type of, even smaller budget, God forbid, those type of movies. And when you lose that, you lose what you said, the ability for filmmakers, for artists, even for actors, performers to like develop and to grow. It's the old Samuel Beckett, learning to fail better kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And there is no potential for that, where no one's allowed to develop. There's no development arc. You have to come out of the womb perfected in your craft already. Yeah. And there's not like someone can't recognize, because I'm sure, and we've already talked about it, there were producers and other high profile stars and directors and everybody from Robert Redford to Barry Levinson and even more, who saw something in Soderbergh, who saw something in Sex, Lies, and even saw something in maybe Kafka, and were like, this guy has something. There's something here. Let's give him a little more money, and let's give him this next thing, and let's give him this next thing. And we've discussed, like, he also was able to earn those things through doing so well at his job, a good person to work with. But like, he got a development arc, and that just doesn't exist anymore.
Doesn't exist much in the book industry either, but that's for another day and another podcast. We both love this movie so much that I'm a little worried it's going to be hard to discuss it without sounding like Chris Farley's interviews of guest hosts on Saturday Night Live.
You remember in Something Wild when Melanie Griffith had you handcuffed to the bed? Remember that?
Yeah.
And you had to make that phone call, remember? And you were chained to the thing and you couldn't get away.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Out of Sight is awesome, but I'm sure we can still find some original things to say about it.
I think we can. Absolutely. Let's talk about the film as film a little bit, just, devoid of some of the context that we always prattle on about. I think, and we alluded to this a moment ago, I think that one of the things that comes through both on screen, but also both in all of our kind of reading and research about the film, is that Soderbergh has finally relaxed. It's like he unclenched. He described the making of Out of Sight as, quote, the most fun you could have making a studio movie, end quote.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that. And I think that's the part where he references, like he said in his pitch, the Hal Ashby thing. Think about like The Last Detail, which a movie that I love, that has this really not quite a hangout movie, I wouldn't say, because it's a little more narratively driven, but it has that relaxed feel and you can feel it in the performances. But the key thing here is that Soderbergh made it's still a studio movie, and you can look at his contemporaries and you can see that they're also making studio films, but I would argue they're different than what Soderbergh is doing. They're studio movies in budget only, and they're still relying on those, indie filmmaking, instincts and aesthetics, which serve up, there's so much more flair and style. And not to say that Out of Sight is devoid of style, but like what David O. Russell was doing at the time, and Fincher and Paul Thomas Anderson, there's just so much character in it, and there's so much panache. Where Soderbergh is, like we've said, he's more of the classicist. He's more of the Sidney Lumet. He's more of the Michael Curtiz, whomever. Mm-hmm. So when I say that, I don't mean it in a bad way by any means. My own perspective, I've only directed one film. I consider myself in the same regard. What I'm really saying is that Soderbergh didn't seem to go into Out of Sight saying, let me take what I did in Kafka or what I did in Schizopolis and let me apply it here. He is making a studio picture similar to what he did in King of the Hill, but like you said, with this more laid back and looser approach. And it works.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that serves him so well in making the studio film is his ability to collaborate, right? Because Schizopolis was a run and gun production. Obviously, he made it with a few friends. Nobody got paid. He's kind of wearing almost all of the hats. Unlike that, Out of Sight had a healthy budget and some very professional collaborators. I mean, the screenplay is by Scott Frank, who also adapted Get Shorty. Cinematography is by Elliot Davis, who had also done King of the Hill, Underneath, and Grey's Anatomy for him. Edited by Anne V. Coates, who is a legendary 5-time Oscar nominee who won for one of my favorite movies of all time, Lawrence of Arabia. And a funny story, actually, just aside about Anne V. Coates. Apparently, she and Soderbergh were going back and forth a little bit. And she didn't think there was enough sex in the hotel scene between J-Lo and Clooney. Even though she was approximately 72 years old at the time.
I feel like we need to add an Al Pacino, like, hoo-ah!
And so this is also the first time Soderbergh didn't work with Cliff Martinez, except for Schizopolis, which was its own little thing. So the music is by David Holmes, and this was the start of a long career scoring films for Holmes. What I'm saying is, like, he has some slightly bigger personalities in the room. Soderbergh is learning that he's not going to be his own screenwriter anymore. And so he becomes a very amiable collaborator with screenwriters. I mean, if you listen to the commentary track, he and Scott Frank get along great.
Unlike some screenwriters.
It's almost the most boring commentary track of Soderbergh, but it's great to like see the kind of, I don't know, these people hold each other in regard and like,
which by the way, we're referencing the Limey in a rocky relationship that with the screenwriter who remain unnamed.
More to come on that.
Yeah, they're not done.
Yeah. At any rate, just like Soderbergh, I think a lot of his success, and we'll get to it in a moment when we talk about casting, but like his ability to play well with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like he has done, he like we said in Schizopolis, he's learned to like pare it down a little bit. It's almost like, getting, how do I say this? Like more with less, I guess, like really kind of cutting out the fat. Really honing in on like what the important pieces are and to put as much value into those pieces as possible. And then, just kind of move forward from there. And the same thing with the cast. I mean, like here, I'm sure you have thoughts about the cast, which are, I mean, it's the casting here who I don't know who the casting director is, but the casting is absolutely all time.
I mean, we have to talk about this cast. We usually don't go too deep into that, but like, come on. It's just such an amazing cast. And this is an ensemble film. I mean, okay, so obviously we got, Clooney and J-Lo have chemistry. And there was a moment where Sandra Bullock was being considered for the J-Lo role, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, she was. And I think that she, correct me if I'm wrong, she didn't get it, I think, because that Soderbergh saw how much better Clooney was with Jennifer Lopez.
That sounds right. I do remember him saying something like there was nothing wrong with her performance and that she was good. It just, he felt like Clooney and Lopez had more kind of Elmore Leonard energy or something like that. It's a romance. It's a funny offbeat romance. So you've got to nail the two leads, and that's really important. But this is truly an ensemble film. And there are just so many great roles. There are also people who will kind of become, as time goes by, regulars in Soderbergh movies. Before we get into some of the ensemble, though, like, so J-Lo as Karen Sisco, like, she had made some movies at this point, right? But the jury was still really out on her career, for sure. I mean, because she had made Oliver Stone's U-Turn, which I remember as being like a solid movie. Yeah. But then she'd also made Anaconda, which people enjoy more ironically, let's say.
I enjoy Jon Voight in it. And his just bonkers performance.
Oh my gosh. But getting into the ensemble. So we got Don Cheadle as Maurice Miller. Soderbergh said, if you can get Don Cheadle, you get Don Cheadle. He was coming off Boogie Nights. Don Cheadle is great. As far as I'm concerned, he's great in everything he's ever made. He's one of my favorite actors. He's just an amazing ensemble player. He never upstages anybody. He makes everything he's in better.
Definitely. Yes. Agreed.
And he's playing a little bit against type in this too, because he often plays like a buddy and a kind of like a good guy. He's playing kind of an amiable bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah. The good old Snoopy Miller.
They don't call me that anymore.
Oh, that's right. Oh no, Maurice, sorry.
You got Ving Rhames as Buddy Bragg. He's coming off Con Air, and he'd already been in the first Mission Impossible. So his career was kind of already made.
Yeah.
He's obviously terrific in this. A shout out to Steve fucking Zahn as Glenn Michaels. He is so good in this. I can't even convey my admiration for his acting in a role that I think a lot of people would have turned into just a one-note joke or something, because he's the comic relief.
Yeah.
And yet he infuses this role with pathos. You see that this is just kind of a doofus who's in over his head. And then when he witnesses these horrific killings in Detroit, and you see the fear and the sadness and the grief on his face, and again, he's just a supporting role.
Yeah.
He's one of many actors in this film, and yet it's an indelible performance.
No, I would say, and sorry to jump in here, if this movie were made after the year 2000, the year, Soderbergh's big year, which we'll get to, where he started getting Oscar cred and box office, cred and all this kind of stuff, and he was really in the mix of like prestige premier directors. If Out of Sight is made in 2002 or 3 or whatever, I would think Steven Zahn would at least be in the discussion for a best supporting actor.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a good call. I defy anybody to watch that and not be impressed with that performance. And again, he's standing out in an incredibly talented ensemble. I mean, you've also got Luis Guzman as Chino, another Boogie Nights veteran like Don Cheadle. These guys will come back in the Soderbergh cinematic universe, coming back very soon. He'll be in the Limey in a much better role than he is in this one even. Albert Brooks, great use of Albert Brooks. He had last been seen in Sidney Lumet's little remembered Critical Care, and he's just wonderful playing against type. And I can't recall if it was his idea to wear the toupee.
It was, yeah. I don't know why, but he wanted to have the rugs.
He really brought the rugs. Really brought something to the role. I would say they become a really memorable. That's a supporting performance from the toupees.
It was, yes.
When they open the safe and find the toupees. Catherine Keener, also somewhat against type as Adele, after she had played leads in Nicole Holofcener's Walking and Talking in 1996 and Steve Buscemi's Living in Oblivion, kind of a fun little movie about filmmaking in 1995.
Yeah, that was a great movie. Yeah, and she has one of the best scenes. Her and Guzman have one of the most, I think, memorable scenes, the fake legs.
So good.
Which is such a great moment. The movie is packed with great moments, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Guzman's character's concern with discovering the truth behind this magic trick. It's so good. Like, if you can give a supporting character this little bit of business that kind of carries them through, something a little secondary concern, it just comes to life. And Soderbergh's really good at that. And that's what makes his ensemble movies, I think, really shine, is there's often a little bit of side business that just makes it seem more real and often funnier.
And it's just loose. I feel like it lets them be a little bit looser. Because if you know that scene, and I wonder if this was intentional, where he's getting arrested and he gets pushed through the door by Jennifer Lopez, by Karen. She pushed him hard and he's like, "Oh, you're mean," like. But prior to that, he's like, fake legs, and he gets bumped and she's like, "Oh, you're mean." Like, I feel like that's a little bit improv, and it's to the looseness until like he's talking about something silly, then he gets bumped, and you get this like great. I would be willing to bet a really great organic moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Soderbergh, I think this is where he's maybe this is the moment where he's really learned this lesson or is putting this lesson he's already learned into effect, which is choose the right people for the role and let them do what they do. A lot of people talk about he does not over-direct actors.
Right.
He chooses the right people and he knows what they'll bring. And he's very open to their improvements on set, which is not something we can say about a lot of directors. And I won't mention my favorite whipping boy, but he's very open to what the universe or this constellation of actors will provide.
Yeah, no, I mean the looseness, like you said. I mean, I would beg anyone to, like, Schizopolis and Grey's Anatomy are their own kind of back-to-back thing, but like from the Underneath to Out of Sight, the Underneath is so rigid. It's so rigid, and you see like the rigidity of that to looseness of Out of Sight, like it's just night and day.
100%. So he also, in the supporting cast, smaller roles, and we have Dennis Farina, who's always reliable as Marshall Sisko, Karen's dad. He was also in Get Shorty, so kind of part of the Elmore Leonard cinematic universe, different role. Wendell B. Harris Jr., a very interesting choice as Burden. His presence is so interesting. Soderbergh chose him very intentionally for a very different kind of energy.
Yeah. He seems to be... he's not the hard-nosed, whatever FBI agent or whatever he is. He just more has like an exasperated tone.
Yeah. And they have previous, right?
Oh, yeah. They knew each other.
Or
at least of each other, because, his movie, Chameleon Street, was at Sundance the year after Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And Soderbergh was then on the jury. And I don't know if it's typical. Again, it was the American Film Fest at that time.
Right.
But I don't know if this is tradition or routine or whatever, that like the winner of Sundance, if they come back to be on the jury the next year, if that's just how it works. But it just so happened that Soderbergh was on the jury, and Harris's film, like I said, Chameleon Street, was a movie that he really, really championed when he was on the jury.
I think there's a story like he refused to adjourn or something until they gave the award to Chameleon Street. And it wasn't because he was being a dick about it. It's just like they didn't have a tiebreaker and nobody, it was deadlocked. And he was like, well, if everybody likes it, let's name this movie let's give it the prize.
I believe that's correct. I think he was that adamant about it, So yes, I believe that is true. And I believe I did read that. Yeah.
It's so funny that they would, that's actually a great gimmick if they give you the grand prize one year and then they make you be on the jury next year, because you kind of can't refuse. And it's always hard to get people to judge things.
Right.
You're not going to turn them down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what they just keep it going that way.
So we also had Viola Davis as Moselle, a small but important role. And this is her second role in film after a cameo in The Substance of Fire. She got her Screen Actors Guild card on this one. Pretty cool.
That is cool.
Isaiah Washington in a very scary, but also very nuanced turn as Kenneth Miller. We have fan favorite Nancy Allen as Midge showing up at the end of the movie.
I love Nancy Allen.
Michael Keaton, again, from the Elmore Leonard Cinematic Universe.
What have we done?
As Ray Nicolette, right? So Stacey Sher of Jersey Films had the idea to cast Keaton as Ray Nicolette. And it's, as far as we know, as far as they know, as far as anybody knows, it's a filmic first, a recurring character played by the same actor who appears in two completely unrelated movies. Soderbergh asked Tarantino's permission. I don't think he really had to, but he did. And Tarantino liked the idea and showed all his Jackie Brown outtakes to Soderbergh. That would have been an interesting scene.
I heard Soderbergh's like, no, I don't need to see that. I'm good. But no, you have to go.
Yeah, let's hang, man. Let's hang.
Like them.
I've got thoughts.
Soderbergh's like, God, do I need this scene?
It's like such. There's clearly respect between those two filmmakers, but I could not think of two more different personalities.
No, I cannot. Yeah, so that had been a day for Soderbergh.
Anyway, so apparently Keaton did the part for free and shot his part in one single day. So good on him. A couple of cameos from some Soderbergh regulars. Joe Crest, who's the intolerable bellhop from King of the Hill, plays Andy. He was also in The Underneath as a hitman and will show up in Erin Brockovich. Mike Malone, who plays our favorite T. Azimuth Schwitters in Schizopolis, and the smoking man in The Underneath, plays the customer in the first bank scene. Such a great scene.
Yeah.
Out of Sight. And Scott Allen, a Soderbergh buddy from Baton Rouge and the right-hand man in Schizopolis, plays Officer Pupko, the prison guard that Clooney fools in The Escape. And amazing cameo at the very, very end, Samuel L. Jackson as an escape artist prisoner in the van with Jack that kind of foreshadows a possible ending for his character.
It just dawned on me. Oh boy. So it just dawned on me that, like, if you really want to make the Elmore Leonard universe, that final moment is the post-credit scene. And who better than Nick Fury to show up? Oh no.
Oh man. Okay, yeah, I think we've unleashed some dangerous radical energy into the world. Okay, quickly, because we could talk about this probably for a whole nother podcast, but let's talk about Out of Sight and Jackie Brown and Get Shorty. We've talked about the cinematic universe a little bit. Cage match between these films. Who comes out alive in your cage match?
Well, being totally earnest, I really, really do love all three of these movies. Like, I think we split a little bit on Get Shorty. Granted, I might have a little bit of nostalgia for it because it's for some reason stands out as a really important cinematic moment. I saw it in the theater and I loved it, and it was so. I really have always loved Travolta. I kind of grew up on him. My parents are fans, so it was part of his comeback arc. But obviously, Out of Sight is my favorite of these. Then comes Jackie Brown, and Get Shorty is the last, which is not a slight. I mean, I love, as much as we've talked about Tarantino, what I love about Jackie Brown is that it stands out in his earlier filmography as being a really mature, like one of his most mature, definitely his most mature movie at the time, and still, his arguably one of his most mature films. It's a great adaptation. It has such great subtle flourishes. I mean, I'll always remember it for the scene where Samuel Jackson kills Chris Tucker. It's the oneer where he drives around the lot, the music's playing, it fades, it comes back. It's a really masterful moment, just that alone. But otherwise, I mean, the love story between, Robert Forster and Pam Grier is just so tender and so warm and so great, so unlike anything from Tarantino. But, I can go on about Jackie Brown, but I really do enjoy all three. And as much as I love Out of Sight, it's still pretty narrow with Jackie Brown. I think it's a really remarkable achievement, but Out of Sight is my favorite.
Out of Sight wins. It's funny. I like all of these, no question. And I do like Get Shorty. There's something about it that when I rewatched it, I just felt I had really good memories of it and remembering it, loving it, honestly. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to revisit movies at different stages in your life because you've changed and sometimes your feelings about things change. Watching it again, I just felt like it was really enjoyable, and it felt to me it was also not anywhere close in achievement to Jackie Brown and Out of Sight.
Sure.
But really good. Travolta is somebody who I really loved during his comeback. And as time goes by, I kind of look back and I'm like, I still I have fond feelings for him, but he's just kind of limited as an actor. And maybe the Scientology thing plays in a little bit. I don't know. Maybe my attempt to watch Battlefield Earth, finally put me over the edge or something. So again, like somebody I feel fond about. I have fond feelings for that movie. But it just definitely feels to me like the lesser achievement, and nothing against Barry Sonnenfeld or anybody involved in that.
No, absolutely. It does lack the artistry of the other two.
Good movie. And Jackie Brown, for many years, I said was my favorite Tarantino film. Since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's been challenged a little bit. I will say it's one of my favorite Tarantino films. And Tarantino is somebody who I I think I may have said this on the podcast before. I have very complicated feelings about Tarantino. His movies that I love. Some of his movies have really fallen away for me. I think I told you that when I rewatched Pulp Fiction a year or two ago, I honestly couldn't finish it. I just couldn't stay in the moment. It felt so of its time, and it felt so self-conscious and so much about Tarantino, really, that I didn't love it. But I still think he's a remarkable talent who can make amazing films. And even in his worst films, there's always an amazing sequence. He can do great things. And I think Jackie Brown is such a special movie. When I was thinking about how I would rate, Jackie Brown versus Out of Sight, I was struggling because I just have loved Jackie Brown so much. I think it's also a rare film about a mature relationship and mature people. Hollywood does not give great roles to actors in midlife.
No.
They just don't. And they're so rare and so special. And maybe I feel that way now because I'm a little older than I used to be. But I think Jackie Brown is an absolutely magnificent film. But having rewatched Out of Sight a number of times in preparation for this, and recently watched Jackie Brown, I think I have to give it to Out of Sight. It's a judge's decision, and it's so close, but maybe by a hair, it goes to Out of Sight, because I think that Out of Sight as a film is ultimately going to please more people. It's so well balanced with the humor. I mean, Jackie Brown still does have a few kind of indulgent Tarantino moments, let's be honest.
Definitely.
And I don't know, if there's a movie that's going to consistently put a smile on my face throughout, it's Out of Sight.
I agree. There's just not an ounce of anything unnecessary in that movie. It's so lean. It's so perfectly edited. I mean, the editor, as we said, was pretty good. And
knew her stuff, I would say.
Not bad. Like I said, I think it's a perfect movie. There's nothing that drags. There's not a moment that doesn't belong. Each moment has its unique character and charm and love behind it. And there's not a second of that movie that I think that can go away. And I think that's the mark of a perfect film.
Agreed. Well, we could go on, but since we promised listeners at the start of the season that we were going to do our best not to record episodes that would be longer than the movies we're discussing, I think we better take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll learn whether Soderbergh finally broke his box office losing streak.
The movie is based on an Elmore Leonard novel and realizes that for Leonard, the plot is much less important than relishing the characters and the way they talk to one another. Out of Sight is an example of the right actors in the right movie at the right time. Clooney and Lopez have a nice, unforced, colorful intimacy throughout the film, and both of them seem utterly confident of their comic powers so that they never force anything. They let the laughs and Leonard's dialogue develop naturally. The movie was directed by Steven Soderbergh, and it's his best since Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which was nearly 10 years ago. It's tricky the way the movie's timeline doubles back on itself so that you leave the theater still trying to figure out exactly what happened when. I think this is one of the year's best entertainments.
Well, I want to focus on something you said, which is that it's less about a plot than about the characters. And frankly, I wish you would give that speech in every theater in which this film plays, because I think a lot of people are going to be confused.
Really?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was sitting there and basically, wondering what's this about because of the number of, as you said, colorful characters. I mean, that's the real essence of the film, is just this parade of characters. I mean,
actually, that makes this the most faithful movie yet, based on an Elmore Leonard novel. And I read all of his books, and he just loves to get into the situations. People sit around and talk, and the plot is kind of held over till the next chapter. And by the time they finally get around to raiding the guy's house and so forth, it's more like how the characters interact there than whether or not they get the diamonds. And I like that.
Yeah, but it can be disturbing or difficult for an audience that isn't prepared for it.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for a more conventional film. I wouldn't want to do that by saying that there should be a through line, as they say in a script, here. So, but it could use something approaching that, because otherwise it's just
but it's a movie for smart people. I mean, it's not just for your caper, crime, action, car chase movie.
I think you just congratulated yourself with that remark, didn't you?
Thank you.
Thank yourself. You said it, not me.
I'm so glad Soderbergh didn't try to bring Chris Kattan on board Out of Sight. It would have been a very different movie.
It would have, yes. Although maybe a nude George Clooney could have saved human nature, I doubt it. I don't think so. But point is, we loved Out of Sight. But what did the world think of it, Keir?
Well, our man Ebert loved it, obviously, as we heard during the break. In his wonderfully perceptive review for the Chicago Sun-Times, he compares Clooney and Lopez's chemistry to Bogart and Bacall and says they both have star quality. He concludes, quote, "For Steven Soderbergh, Out of Sight is a paradox. It's his best film since Sex, Lies, and Videotape a decade ago, and yet at the same time, it's not what we think of as a Soderbergh film, detached, cold, analytical. It is instead the first film to build on the enormously influential Pulp Fiction instead of simply mimicking it. It has the games with time, the low-life dialogue, the absurd violent situations, but it also has its own texture. It plays like a string quartet written with words instead of music, performed by sleazeballs instead of musicians."
We could have just read this. That could have been the whole episode. We could have been done by now.
There's so much to unpack in that. I mean, a very interesting reference to Pulp Fiction. I don't think Soderbergh was that influenced by Pulp Fiction, but I get it. This is an era where a ton of movies were. And if you look at it in that lineage, like, okay, fair enough. It's kind of like a ensemble violent crime caper that is also original.
Yeah. I mean, the more as I get older, and we can go on along, we keep ending up in Tarantino land. This is just how he plans it. Everyone's talking about him, But it does irk me that like the idea that criminals talking about stuff other than crime or whatever was invented by Pulp Fiction, which kind of, I don't know, diminishes all of the 50s and 40s noir, which, I mean, that was kind of loose, but even like Altman did this stuff, Hal Ashby did this stuff, as Soderbergh himself would say, like, it was of the moment of the 90s. That's where Pulp Fiction was the lightning rod. Everybody was talking about it. And many people were intentionally, clearly ripping it off. 2 Days in the Valley was like trying its best to be Pulp Fiction. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. So you can see how these things get conflated. But now with time, it's like, Pulp Fiction didn't necessarily invent that wheel.
You make an excellent point. And it's also kind of funny. I mean, yes, in one way, Tarantino is an original, but it's also kind of hilarious to call him an original in a way, because he's like a magpie. He's a pack rat. Like he's an assimilator. He compiles the best things other people have done in an original way.
Yes.
But he's not maybe a true original. I don't know. We've already said too much about Tarantino in a Soderbergh podcast.
True.
Anthony Lane in The New Yorker said, after many mishaps, the art of bringing Elmore Leonard's novels to the screen is coming to fruition. This latest adaptation gets it just about right. Variety called it a slyly sexy, vastly entertaining film version of Elmore Leonard's playful crime novel, said it represents director Steven Soderbergh's most ambitious and most accomplished work to date. Critic after critic loved it, with only a few exceptions. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader, writing the dissenting opinion, said, some reviewers have applauded Out of Sight for its nuances of character, but I and others don't see any characters at all.
I wish people could hear my eyes roll right now. Like I and others. Give me names.
Yeah, I like the way he said others, just to kind of like build critical consensus. Like, whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. It's such an Ebertian passage that you read.
Yes.
So sums up his knowledge and love and straightforwardness, and that it's such a Rosenbaum. Because listeners, Keir and I are both Chicago guys, so we're very familiar with the Reader and Rosenbaum's work, and this is very much a Rosenbaum quote, especially the I and others. The friend at my cocktail parties, we were talking about Out of Sight and la di da di da.
Rosenbaum gonna Rosenbaum.
Yeah.
Awards and honors. Soderbergh will go on to make movies that rack up a lot more of these. Scott Frank received an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay and won an Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America, an organization of which I am a member. Anne V. Coates received an Academy Award nomination for editing. And the big one, Clooney and Lopez were nominated for Best Kiss at the MTV Movie Awards, losing to Gwyneth Paltrow and Joseph Fiennes in Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah, all that heat between Paltrow and Ray Fiennes' brother.
Oh, man. I'd say Clooney and J-Lo were robbed. Out of Sight did win Best Film, Best Director, and Best Screenplay at the National Society of Film Critics Awards. Not the biggest thing, but hey, it's something.
It's something. More than I've won.
I remain award eligible.
Yeah. Critics definitely liked it. This is a home run, I think it's safe to say, for Soderbergh in this arena. But the other metric is box office. So tell me, Keir, did people buy tickets and go see Out of Sight in theaters? Did Soderbergh finally make a second profitable movie?
Well, yes and no. So in my original notes for this, I was like, yes, Out of Sight made money with 3 exclamation points. It had a $48 million budget. It opened with $12 million and went on to earn $37.5 million domestically and nearly $78 million worldwide, which is good. It didn't lose money. But
No.
In Hollywood math, which you know a lot more about than I do, it's still not like a smash hit. And I think he talked about it later as being kind of it did okay.
Conventional Hollywood wisdom is that you have to at least double the budget because you're going to get, half the door basically. So you get whatever you made. And sometimes that number, the half fluctuates for international box office, but you're typically going to get somewhere around 50% back. So if the movie made, let's say 80 million, studio's getting 40 million, the budget's 48. Okay. Now you have a problem. And that doesn't account for whatever they spent on marketing, promotion, etc. So yeah, it's probably in the red initially, but this is a movie, as you know, as anybody listening this knows, has existed and stuck around for 25 years now in DVD and streaming and 4K and whatever. So it has surely made its money back. Now, it'll also be the case that whatever the studio is still saying it's lost all the money. Nope, sorry, Out of Sight. It's lost all the money. It's just, we're just trying to get Titanic to get into profit, and then we're gonna look at Out of Sight.
Then we can cut you guys some checks. Just be patient. Yeah, but the good news is that even though it didn't make a ton of money out of the gate, it's not a return that anyone was going to hold against Soderbergh, right? I mean, it's a respectable return at the box office.
Yeah, and then you can argue even too that it was maybe not released. It was a summer release. It maybe wasn't an adult crime movie maybe wasn't the best release time, maybe it's more of a fall movie.
Yeah.
Which might have helped it, maybe not. But no, there's nothing to like, look at and wonder how this guy kept going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take another quick break before we talk about the new spring and Steven Soderbergh's Stride and how we don't have to say, what the fuck, Steve?
I mean, we will. And after a few more episodes, but we will say that again.
Jack is the female of the movie. He's a feeler. He lets his emotions rule his decisions. Karen's kind of got the guy part in this movie. I mean, think about it. She comes in at the end, she shoots him, and she walks out.
Mike, when we started this podcast and I had only general memories of Soderbergh's early films, it was easy to look at his first 6 and say, what the fuck, Steve? What are you doing? But as we've gone on this journey of discovery, frequently hearing from the man himself, I feel more and more that his choices are very understandable. We may not always agree with what he did, but it seems clear that he wasn't flailing about wildly and was picking projects for reasons of his own, except maybe the underneath, and because he probably did that because he lost the opportunity to direct Quiz Show.
Yeah, probably.
But also, because he was adapting his style to the material, I think that made his choices appear more random than they actually were. I mean, can you imagine if my favorite whipping boy, David Fincher, made Kafka, King of the Hill, and The Underneath?
No, actually. But, it goes to show 2 things. One, how much cachet you can accrue with a massive indie hit, which Soderbergh had with Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Of course, this virtually can't happen anymore with the Hollywood system existing as it currently does because it's utterly dysfunctional. But, that's a different story. But the point is that Sex, Lies, and Videotape bought Soderbergh time. And that's time that he used and well spent. And the second point, though, is that he mastered the art of failing small. Fincher, who we like Tarantino, we bring up often because, this is the generation that they probably arguably 3 of the most, influential directors of this generation. So it's natural to bring that up. But he's such a great example to compare to Soderbergh in this case, because the thing with a Fincher movie is that like you can't walk in the door with him without less than like, I'm just ballparking here, but like, I don't know, like a $60 million budget, maybe more, and for the time that he requires, the cast that he needs, the special effects that he uses, he can't do small. Like he can't. I mean, I would venture to guess maybe forced into he can, but like from the evidence that we have and the movies that he's made and the way that he makes them, from what we know, he's a guy who can't do small, and if he hadn't followed up, let's just say, for example, Fight Club, which despite being now again, I use that word influential, and a movie that I really appreciate, it was still a dud at the box office.
Right.
It was expensive. And I think it was like an $80 million budget that it made like 40 to 50 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it lost quite a bit, and it had high expectations on it because that's coming off of, 7 in The Game, which were both successful. But if he hadn't followed that up with Panic Room, which was a smash, who knows where he would have landed.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good point. It's so interesting to think about it in those terms too, because the movies that last, whatever, they last, and we just tend to think that they were big at the time. I mean, Fight Club is like such a touch point. I mean, the book is also or touchstone rather, among certain dudes that it's almost like this kind of like feminist joke about men or something like that. But it occupies this huge cultural space that Panic Room does not.
No, it's kind of weird. Like Panic Room was far more successful, but no one really talks about Panic Room in the same way that they talk about Fight Club. It just doesn't happen.
Absolutely. It's just not and a less memorable viewing experience. Really, God, I do love this thought experiment of thinking about like Fincher making like a smaller personal film or something like that. I mean, he'll never do it, but wouldn't that be fascinating?
No, I mean, I think the closest that we'll probably get is Mank because his dad wrote it. But even that was a pretty big production.
I did not enjoy that movie very much.
I did not either.
Again, not Soderbergh, but yeah, that was really disappointing. It was a movie I was primed to love.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Soderbergh. It's like, well, it's still really well done, and it's really well shot, and there's a lot of creative flair and artistry to it, but it's a slog. That movie's a slog.
And maybe that's, partly because of the difference in directorial approaches, because he, like, again, so our man Soderbergh, to bring it back to him, it's like through his early struggles, he did teach himself the important skill of adapting, adapting his approach. He taught himself to be flexible in so many different ways, but he really taught himself to come at something in the way that the subject matter requires. And maybe that's the problem with Mank, right? Is it's like you've got a filmmaker who doesn't really know how to shoot what is ultimately a more personal movie.
True.
And it ends up being like this kind of like capital P project or something, or this capital S statement or something, when it would have, if it were more organic and just more about the actors and more intimate, I think that movie could have come off better.
Yeah, and it makes me think of something as we're doing this comparison. It makes me think like the formative experiences of these two directors, because Soderbergh never had the experience that Fincher had on Alien 3, which is basically, having a movie taken away from him and recut and studio hacked to death. We'll never quite know what everyone's had the different screenplays floating around and this and that, but we'll never really know what the Fincher cut would have been or could have been or anything like that. And I would assume somebody walks away from that experience and says, never again. Like, I will never let anybody have a modicum of control. I'm going to control every single thing. And since then, he has controlled every single thing to this extreme, where Soderbergh has had a lot of freedom. Like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, he had a lot of freedom. He got support from, like we said earlier in this episode, Levinson. He got support from Redford until that went bad. But he won Cannes and he won, Sundance right out the gate. He was afforded a lot, and we're glad he was. He was afforded a lot of freedom. Nobody took movies away from him. He doesn't have that experience. So you see, like, where the zig and the zag, where Soderbergh finally embraces that freedom, and where Fincher gets tightens it up.
That is such a provocative thesis. I love it. And I also think I hear you saying that Alien 3 is Fincher's Rosebud.
Wow.
So Soderbergh told Film Journal International, in terms of style, there are two ways of working. There are directors who have a signature style, and they look for material they can impose that style on. Then there are filmmakers who work from the material outward and ask what kind of style is appropriate for this material. I'm the second kind. He also told The Village Voice that he was glad people had given up trying to figure him out, and that he was glad to be unpredictable and uncategorizable. But is he? I mean, although Soderbergh is clearly a director who adapts his approach to the material instead of the other way around, I also think that it's clear, 7 films in, that he does have an emerging style. And so I want to, this episode is going a little longer than we normally plan to go, but I want to discuss his signatures a little bit. The material he chooses, his visual trademarks, and a few other things that make a Soderbergh film Soderberghian.
Yeah, that's a word.
When you say the word Soderbergh enough, you start to feel like you're in the being John Malkovich restaurant scene. And the only word you can speak is Soderbergh, Soderbergh, Soderbergh. Okay, but so I think because obviously we've talked a lot off mic about these things. I think we're in agreement about a lot of these things. So story choices, it feels pretty clear that he's attracted to stories of outsiders and people who don't fit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which sort of makes sense because it feels like he's good with people in a way, but we clearly know from his relationships that he also kind of has a hard time letting his guard down and really relating. And maybe that's kind of a Swedish thing. I don't know. But in some ways, I think he, and he is an outsider in Hollywood, right? Because he didn't come up he didn't go to UCLA Film School. I mean, he was always kind of rooted in Baton Rouge, and throughout his early career, he was going back and forth. He couldn't didn't want to commit to Hollywood, which is great. He also is attracted to stories about people who come back and try to fix mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is such an interesting thing, because I feel like that's he went back and re-edited his movies. He went back and redid Kafka. He literally went back and tried to fix his mistake.
Mike, you're on fire. Wow. Soderbergh is very Soderberghian. I mean,
is.
it's good. He's on brand. So he also has like some storytelling choices that I think are clearly becoming trademarks, right? So fractured timelines and non-sequential storytelling. And next week's episode, we're really going to get into that in a big way.
Definitely.
But also clarity. And this is something we've talked about quite a bit. Like clarity.
Yeah. I have this this quote that I pulled from a interview that he did with The Believer. And he said, this is his exact words, "I will say, and coming from someone who's made some of the TV and movies I've made, it may seem disingenuous, but the hardest thing in the world is to be good and clear when creating anything. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's really easy to be obscure and elliptical and so fucking hard to be good and clear. It breaks people because you don't often get encouragement to do that, to be good and clear."
Amen. Preach, Brother Soderbergh. Yeah, I think we see it again and again in his, when you listen to the commentary tracks and he talks about editing choices, he's relentless. And oftentimes he cuts some of the most painful things because he's trying for clarity. He's trying to be clear.
Yeah.
And I know it's my soapbox. I've got on it many times, so I won't stand on it long, but just in the world of books, so often people don't interrogate their idea thoroughly enough before they begin writing. And you end up with these murky, I'm reading one now, I won't name, but a long 600-page literary novel that could have been a really enjoyable 350-page novel. It's just overstuffed. And it's not clear. It's not clear. I don't know that the author, I think the author was trying to do 5 things. And sometimes you're just better served by trying to do 1 or maybe 2.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a plague. And I think he's right that that's not encouraged more, because I think it's like, those books that are brain twisters, you know, like you said, or even movies that like oftentimes get rewarded. And I walk away from cold. I can think of a very specific movie that I watched recently that people loved. And I've had a chat with friends that are like, what the hell was it? What was it about? You know, what was the central thing? It's like the philosophy, former philosophy major long ago. I'll probably pronounce his name wrong. Leibniz, forget, but he had the monad, which is like the essential, basically a word for the soul, which is the essential thing. What is the essential being of the essential piece of a being? And what is the monad of a story? You know, what is the essential thing? And he does that so well. He finds, you know, to put in those terms, the monad, and he sticks to it.
I'm going to make you tell me what that movie is when we're done recording.
I'll tell you. I have many thoughts.
So I think one of the easier things to identify as the Soderberghian kind of trademarks are his visual trademarks, right? I mean, by now we've seen enough films, and I hope some of you are watching along with us. And I know some of these earlier films are actually a little hard to find. You know, email us if you need help. We'll do our best. But the visual trademarks are the things that start to just become apparent because we're watching and rewatching these films, and we start to see like he loves a through the window shot. Loves it through the window shot.
The underneath, I just feel like crack up. He's like, "Can we get some windows inside the house?"
He built windows inside the house so he could have some more. He likes lens flare and kind of visual artifacts. He's not the only director who does, of course, but you know, I dig it. I mean, I was a kid making Super 8 films in the 70s. And, you know, I remember my dad made a film about hang gliders in the 1970s. And I still remember this just beautiful lens flare and this shot of a hang glider going overhead. And, you know, that's a nostalgic, wonderful thing to me, a little bit of lens flare. So I'm all in.
Yeah. He does do it well. Not too much.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. It could be distracting, but he does it in judicious measure. He sure likes the odd Dutch angle. He also likes to put a character kind of forward in the frame. You know, we often think of like leaving the empty space in front of, you know, in the direction the character is looking. Sometimes he likes, it's a way to create visual tension. All you film students take note. It's very effective, and I'm a fan of it. Like particularly when you're kind of cutting back and forth between two characters in dialogue, and they're kind of forward in the frame. It makes you feel a little unsettled, and it's very effective. And Mike, talk a little bit more about, because again, you're more the actual scholar of film than I am, but like talk a little bit more about his distinctive framing, because it's in some ways it's just like you kind of start to know Soderbergh shots when you see them, but it's a little bit hard to explain. It's like pornography, you know it when you see it,
right? I sure do. So I think it's appropriate that we were just talking about clarity a moment ago, because, he has visual style, and we keep I think we're almost like working too hard because he's working against us, because he'll be like, no, I don't have style. I'm just, pointing and clicking, and that's not really true. But he's classic, and I think that's something that's so cool about him. Like, despite his experiments in filmmaking, like Schizopolis and other things that we'll discuss down the road that happen later on, he's just a classicist, like he's Sidney Lumet, he's Curtiz, he's George Stevens. He's more of these great Hollywood directors than he is anything else. Like, he's not trying ever to do too much, It's the thing that they say in theater, it's like, know your mark and hit your mark.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it every single time. It's like the great baseball players who just have that knack for just getting on base, just always able to just find their way to first and second, go around and just accomplish the task. And that's not to diminish anything. He just does it so well. He has flourishes, and he shoots, especially later on, he starts to shoot with multiple cameras so he can go faster.
Yes.
Which is really cool, because that's just like, he just wants to speed up his process. He makes great decisions with cutting and editing. And from everything we've heard, and as he goes on and he starts operating his own camera and he's going faster, he's basically editing the movie in his head more or less as he goes, and he really has good instincts for cutting and creative edits that he had done all the way back to Sex, Lies, and Videotape. But for the most part, he just doesn't break or reinvent a whole lot. He just does all the things he's supposed to do really well, really consistently. And while he's achieving narrative clarity, he's also achieving a great deal of visual clarity.
Well said. We'll have to come back and talk about his camera work again a little bit more, maybe a few films down the road when we get to around Traffic or something, and he is doing his own operating. And there's a lot more handheld and it's a lot shakier kind of camera work, which I have a few thoughts about, but very well said for where he is right now in his career.
When I came on board, the film was being told in chronological order, and Scott, Frank, and I both felt that was a problem because we weren't meeting Karen until 30 minutes into the film, and we just felt that was too long. And Scott said, I think we've got to use flashbacks. It was the only way to tell the story properly. And not just because of economy, not just because I didn't want to start the movie with 20 minutes of exposition, but also because I knew a scene like Jack going to see Ripley in his office about the job has more impact 90 minutes into the film than it would have 9 minutes into the film. You'd have nothing invested, and so the scene wouldn't have any weight. And I think I knew that it was better that we employ the flashback structure. And Leonard plays those tricks in his book a lot. The freeze frame idea was something that I knew ahead of time I wanted to do, but I didn't have a formula. I knew I was going to do it at the beginning. I knew that I wanted to freeze him in motion, and have the title come on. But beyond that, I was going strictly on instinct. If you notice, the love scene is the last time we do it. I felt the movie was caught up, and that we were now in the present, and that there wasn't a need for that sort of commentary anymore.
One of the other things, and I alluded to this earlier actually in this podcast, but like I love the way he kind of handles side characters, incidental conversations, supporting characters. Like, they all feel kind of real because they all have something to do. In a Soderbergh movie, it never feels like the supporting cast just shows up to just like deliver the envelope and then get off screen. They never feel like functionaries. Right. They feel like real people who are kind of inhabiting their world. And one of the best ways he does that is with side conversations. I think about like the guards in the underneath, in the armored car warehouse, where there's this kind of ongoing conversation that's kind of funny, and you can kind of follow the development of that every time you return to them. In Out of Sight, Dad and Ray talking about Chino. I mean, that's like a great one.
That is great. Yeah.
I know there's a wonderful one we'll be talking about when we get to the Limey. Like, that is one of my favorite. It's super short.
Oh, the sliding scale.
The sliding scale. And yeah. And Lem Dobbs, of course, hates it. But like, can you think of any other examples of side conversations that I've forgotten? It's tough to do in the spur of the moment.
It's not a side conversation, but just such a side detail that like when, this is really off the top of my head, but this is like when Clooney's first talking about Steve Zahn, studs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he says, if he's wearing those sunglasses, I'm going to step on him and I might not even take them off first, which is a really cool line.
Yeah.
And then he's wearing it. He's wearing the sunglasses and they start talking about the sunglasses for him to take it off. And maybe that's not a side conversation, but it's just, I guess, an incidental building moment.
I mean, it's very much part of the same thing. It's where you're building an expectation with a small character so that when he enters, there's those sunglasses actually mean something.
Yeah.
And that dialogue may have been in the book. I think it was. So much of the dialogue is in the book because obviously Elmore Leonard famously writes excellent dialogue. But, credit to Soderbergh for recognizing it and keeping it in because he cuts a hell of a lot of stuff out.
True.
And I think it's the kind of thing that would just totally resonate with him in elevating a supporting character to a more important role.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
And he also uses dialogue, that overlaps with scenes of people not talking. Like, I love that. Like, that's kind of a classic Soderberghian thing, like minor time shifts. Maybe like somebody's dialogue kind of carries over and then there's somebody like in another moment or they're being just still.
Yeah.
I would say that just an incidental thing that makes Soderbergh is that he hates cliche. And you hear him talk about this time and again in interviews and director's commentaries. Even making a crime film like The Underneath, his protagonist is kind of basically a useless criminal. Like he doesn't make him like the master criminal or whatever.
No, far from it.
and in Out of Sight, even though Foley is like a career bank robber, we focus the focus of the film. The two times you see him robbing banks is like when he fails.
Yeah, and we were going to talk about this earlier, and I think we missed our opportunity, but we discussed how he switches roles. Like J-Lo's kind of like the masculine role. She's the FBI agent. She plays what would typically be a male role, and they kind of do like a swap there to like, again, fight against expectations, which is what cliches are, to do something a little bit fresh, and he does it really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Soderbergh is definitely not a fan of the macho can do it all kind of guy. I mean, later we'll get to Ocean's 11 and we'll get to some pretty cool dudes. But like he often is, there's just something kind of refreshing about it. And that I think would probably explain why I believe a fair amount of women enjoy this film as much. It's not like there are a lot of films that are kind of like guys' films and women's films or whatever those cliches are. But like, I feel like this one, because, Karen Sisco is such a strong, awesome character. She's sexy, but she is absolutely can do. When she takes down a bad guy, she takes him down. I think it's some great.
Yeah, I mean, she as a character, beat Raylan Givens to the punch, and she had her own television show before his, just Karen Sisco, which was great, and you can't find it anywhere, and it has Robert Forster in it. Can't find it anywhere.
Boom.
It's tragic that that's not available because it's one season and it is terrific. It's really great. But then she also, okay, we're going to stop here. But she ended up making, I don't know if you remember, she made and this is Carla Gugino.
Right.
She played Karen Sisco. She made then a cameo, or maybe even two, in Justified, playing Karen Sisco.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, the Elmore Leonard.
Oh my God.
Cinematic universe.
Oh no.
The ELCU. It's a good one. It's a good cinematic universe.
That's a good one. Yeah.
But yeah, he avoids macho fight scenes, cliche gunfights. If he has to treat violence, it never feels like you're watching the violence in the same way you've seen it in film after film after film.
Totally.
And even his endings are rarely pat. I mean, you think about the scene on the porch at the ending of his first film, Sex Lies, the videotape, or you think about the end of Out of Sight. Those are not pat endings. They're kind of nuanced. You're a little like, where's it going to go?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things about it. Like, the ending is really cool because you can't see them, Clooney and J-Lo get together. But you also don't want to see them end on a note where she sends him back to prison. So you get like this really, I don't want to say ambiguous, they just don't show the happy medium, but you get it.
Yeah.
What I liked about Out of Sight was that at the end of the movie, nobody had a big epiphany. Nobody changed and went, oh my God, I've got to stop doing that. That rarely happens in real life. So Karen's solution is to try and figure out a way for them to still be who they are and see each other.
The end of the movie is a great note to end on. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and take a moment to give us a good rating and review on your platform of choice. Or even better, tell a film-loving friend to join us on our journey to watch all the films of Steven Soderbergh. You can follow us on Instagram at The Filmographers or on X at FilmographerPod.
Special thanks to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo and would be happy to design yours too. If you have feedback, suggestions, or just want to share a fun Soderbergh fact, email us at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
And join us next week on the Filmographers Podcast when we'll discuss Soderbergh's stellar follow-up to Out of Sight, The Limey.
I'll give it a butcher's.
You give it a what? No?
A butcher's hook. A look. With me mince pies.
No, I'm not following any of this.
With me eyes, mate. Cockney rhyming slang.
I had no idea. Wow, you're really into the method podcasting.
Gotta make the bees and honey somehow, don't I?